Hello, comic creators. In this episode of the Comics Industry Commentary, we talk about Valiant going down, Webtoons rising up, and Tapas moving in a different direction. My name is Gamal Hennessy. I am an attorney, author, and business consultant who specializes in the comic book industry. And we're going to get started with one of the major stories that dropped in the last 24 hours with one of the larger North American comic book publishers. It has been reported widely in several news outlets, including Bleeding Cool, Comics Beat, and through various posts on Twitter, that there are major moves happening at Valiant. And by major moves, I mean certain high level executives within the company have been reported to either have left or are leaving under terms that are not exactly clear. It's not clear if they were let go. It's not clear if they quit. But it is clear that Valiant is going through some amount of turmoil at the current moment. There have been certain signs leading to this more recent development over the past 2, 3 years. And one of the things that I think is important to note is that for the past 10 years or more, Valiant, like a lot of other comic book companies, have been heavily invested in the idea that I'm going to start calling the maybe movie business model. The way it works is you make comics hoping that maybe someone will give you money to make a movie, which will actually justify all the money that you are borrowing or getting invested or trying to generate to make the comics. Now, I've said on this channel and in the Comics Publishing Institute, when we have our weekly Q&A sessions, that if you're going to have a comic book company, if you're going to have a comic book career, then you have to develop a business model that is actually focused on making money from the comics you produce. If you are making a business model for comics that is based on movies, then you have what I believe is a disjointed business model because you are relying on something that may not come to pass. And in the current environment, when you have recessionary pressures across the board and investment dollars are drying up and expansions of the streaming wars are starting to consolidate, that option may not be as viable as it once was. And in my opinion, even though you see so many comic related media projects launched every week, most comics do not and will not become movies, television shows, video games, or anything else. So if you're going to make money in comics, you're going to have to figure out how to make money from the comic itself. Now, that may be much harder than it sounds, like a lot of companies have found out, but the idea that you're going to make comics to then make a movie and that's how you're going to fund the whole company may not be a winning strategy. Now, that may not be the only reason Valiant is in the position that it's in, but I believe, like a lot of other companies that have set themselves up as IP farms under the guise of being a comic book company, they would probably meet a similar fate. Unless, of course, they just start making comics and making money off the comics, however little money that might be. Um, on the flip side, you have a company like Webtoons that had two major announcements this week. The first one was the VP of Content Development went on to Daily Dot and he explained exactly how Webtoon creators can monetize their comics on the platform. He explained that once you get past a certain threshold of subscribers or you get a certain amount of monthly views, you then share in the advertising revenue that comes from Webtoons and because they're an advertising based model. There's also another tier where they will actually bring you in and help you develop all of those potential media properties, whether it's TV, film, printed books, or anything else. Now, I have a few clients who are actually involved in Webtoons and they've been highly successful at it. However, there is quite a bit of cash coming out of Webtoons, and it's coming for what they refer to as user generated content, which means they're not bringing in high profile comic book teams necessarily to make these books. They're letting the users make the books, share the revenue, and then share potentially in some of the media properties that come from that. And they also had another story that came out of Variety that basically said they have about 100 different projects that are in development or production coming from Webtoons Comics. Now, when you hear that term and you think about what I just said a few minutes ago, keep in mind that there's potentially thousands of movies that are quote unquote in development. The idea that all of them are going to get made is very low. The idea that all of them are going to get released is even lower. And the idea that all of them are going to be good is almost zero, because making movies and making TV shows, like making comics, isn't an easy process. So, yes, there is a viable alternative to making a living in comics coming out of Webtoons. And yes, there are ways that that can actually spin out into other media projects. But like with any other narrative art career, it is top heavy, meaning that there's a few people at the top making huge amounts of money and becoming very successful, whether you're looking at Lore Olympus or any of those titles in that vein. And there's a lot of other people struggling to actually make ends meet and have a career in Webtoons. So while it is a viable path, it does not necessarily mean it is an easy path, but it's something that you, as a creator, should look into, especially if you think other options like Oni, like AWA, like Valiant, or like making your own comic book company are not viable to what it is that you're doing. And having said that, we now have to turn to Tapas, which is also deciding to go the user generated content route, because 2 weeks ago, they started to lay off a lot of the creators that they brought in to create original content. Now they've decided that it actually makes more sense to not bother putting in the cash to develop original IP, even though that IP may have significant value over time. They feel is a much easier business strategy to simply do what Webtoons is doing. Let the users generate the actual content. Let the users generate the actual stories. Tapas will be there to figure out which ones are doing well or not doing well, bump up the ones that they like, and then make deals with those titles that are actually doing well and proven in the market. Because the risk of loss to them to actually have someone else go out and make a story and test it on the platform is almost zero. All you have to do, and this is not necessarily an easy thing from a technical standpoint, but what you have to do is you have to set up a platform by which people can share their content. Once you do that, you basically are setting up for something that is significantly similar to a creator-owned deal. If I am a publisher and someone comes to me with an idea or comes to me with a book that they've already done, the creative costs are already paid for. And that's a major part of the cost. All I have to do now as the publisher is distribute it and then share in the revenue. With Tapas, it's even easier than a creator-owned publisher in print, because I don't have to sink money into the print cost, the shipping cost, or the distribution cost. It's on the platform, and as long as I'm paying for the platform costs, I can then share in that revenue. So the idea that Tapas went into the original content game and then decided to get out of it makes sense if they're trying to control costs, but still maintain that ongoing flow of creativity, because what Tapas has found and what Webtoons has found, and to a large extent, what YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and all these other platforms have found, is that if they let their user base make the content, they can make money off the content without actually putting in the creative costs, the time, or the effort to develop stories and then testing them in the market. So, as a creator, what does this mean for you? You have to figure out where you're going to put your content, what it is that you're going to be getting for your content, and whether those deals make sense for you. You cannot, or you should not, I don't mean you cannot, you can do whatever you want. You should not necessarily just throw your stuff up on any platform without really understanding what the business model is and what the revenue stream is that you might be potentially able to get from your story when you actually find the right audience. So that's going to do it for this week's comics industry commentary. If you have any questions about the comic book industry or any stories that you'd like me to cover or anything that you'd like to talk about, drop it in the comments. I will leave all the links to this stuff in the notes. We will see you next week. And until next time, like and subscribe and have fun with your comics.